welcome to Fresh Perspectives. My name is Gail, and my guest today is a man named Gregg Unterberger, and our topic will be regression and past lives. Would you like to be the one to tell, since it's not in my head right now, would you like to be the one to tell a viewing audience what your line of work is?
Yeah. I'm a former instructor in psychology at Texas State University, and I'm currently a licensed professional counselor in private practice. And I'm also certified as a past life regression therapist. And I trained with Dr. Brian Weiss, who some of the viewers may have heard of. He's the author of Many Lives, Many Masters, the international bestseller.
Oh, yes, yes.
And so that's my background. And so I see clients for garden variety, depression and anxiety, but also for clients that are interested in it, we do past life regression sometimes.
Oh,
Very exciting work.
Oh, yes. And you brought your book today. I wanted to tell you guys, Gregg is married to Colleen van der Zijden, who comes on my program about once a year. And as you know, she is one of the Lilydale mediums. They're sort of newlyweds. They just got married a couple of years ago. And somehow his book is what brought them together. Would you like to show them the book and say something about that?
Yeah, well, The Quickening looks at different ways that we can accelerate our spiritual journey. I think one way to look at spiritual progress is we study the Bible, or maybe we read A Course in Miracles, or follow some spiritual texts, or even do things like meditation. And what The Quickening says is there are ways that we can move ahead more quickly, sort of quantum leaps, where instead of like up a staircase, we're suddenly at the next level. And that's through direct spiritual experience, things like past life regressions, mystical experience, deep meditations. There's probably some viewers watching right now that have had real powerful spiritual experience, and it took them to a whole new level of being in the world.
Because it happened all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And that's why you call it the quickening.
Exactly. A lot of people think, though, that those are, they happen only spontaneously.
Mm-hmm.
But the quickening is about ways that we can sort of go after those things directly. Mm-hmm. We can, knock on the door and it will be opened unto us, as the scripture says.
Mm-hmm.
So there are maybe faster, better ways, potentially, to move ahead on a journey instead of slow walking everything, and grinding it out. Mm-hmm. Although there's nothing wrong with that, and I don't want to take away from anybody's yoga or meditative practice or their study of scripture.
Oh, okay. So anyways, I wanted, did you say something?
Can you hold the book up?
Yeah, I was just, which one, this one?
Can he hold his book up?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
Are they selling those over to Lilydale?
The bookstores, a couple of the bookstores in Lilydale, a couple of stores in Lilydale sell them, and it's available on Amazon as well.
Oh, okay. Okay, I wanted to mention this book. Also, at a previous time I was trying to tell Gregg about this, but I didn't have the book with me. And I couldn't think of the name of the title and the name of the author, but it's called Your Soul's Gift, The Healing Power of the Life You Planned Before You Were Born, by Robert Schwartz. And he also is a certified hypnotherapist who offers spiritual guidance and hypnotherapeutic regressions to help people understand their life plan. For more information, please visit www.yoursoulsplan.com. So it's a really interesting book, but you might once or twice during some of the stories, you might find yourself breaking down and crying with the ones that resonate most with you. That's what happened to me. Okay, now, a lot of people in the viewing audience are probably wondering, if we really have lived previous lifetimes, why don't we remember any of it? And it's my understanding from other people who have experienced something about it that something happens that causes us to have amnesia about these past lifetimes, so that living in this lifetime would not be too confusing, which might be if we could remember everything that we'd ever experienced in all lifetimes. And I'd like you to talk about this.
Well, my guess is that it would be a little overwhelming, just as you said. I mean, there's no way that we can know with absolute certainty why we can't remember them. When you think about it, we can't even remember, what happened exactly on your third birthday party, who was there. It's like, I couldn't tell you, So we can't even remember everything from this lifetime. Why would we be able to remember everything from all our lifetimes? And another way is that it could be a bit overwhelming or guilt-inducing. The theory of reincarnation is that we come back to learn more and more about how to be more loving beings that are more like the divine. Whether that's Jesus or Buddha, or, wiser and more loving and more forgiving would be, and there's a progression from lifetime to lifetime, potentially. And so it might be that we don't remember some things because they're just too egregious, or we would feel too guilty or too bad about them. The famous psychic Edgar Cayce puts it sort of very poetically. He says, some things are blotted out of God's book of remembrance so as to spare us the grief of them, the ills that we might have committed in another lifetime. So that's a nice way to think about it.
Well, in the Christian church, a lot of people believe in a place called hell, and that if you do certain really horrible things, that you will go there, and you have to be baptized, or you might go there if your parents don't bother to get you baptized when you're a baby, and then you die or something like that. But then from reading books and having reading books written by some really famous mediums, and having had conversations with some of these people, it's my understanding that there really is not such a place, and that there isn't such a thing as the devil. It's my understanding that it was made up. That was a story that was made up by a certain part of the Christian community as a way to scare people into not leaving the church. Did you ever hear that?
Well, we could spend a lot of time talking about that. Obviously, that's a very complex topic. But here's what I would say about it is certainly everybody's entitled to their own beliefs about the afterlife. I'm a student of the near-death experience, and in fact speak and do presentations around the country that include the latest information on the near-death experience, which many of your viewers have probably heard of, where someone has an experience of being clinically dead, floating above their body and seeing the beautiful light, and maybe meeting with ancestors who've crossed over. And in that research, there certainly appear to be levels of the afterlife, and some are kind of messy and darker, but very few mentions at all out of thousands and thousands of reports of near-death experiences of anything that looks like the fire and brimstone that a more traditional Christian might believe in, hellfire and damnation. And in fact, there's some interesting questions about the translations from the Greek in the Bible as well. We could go there for an hour, and we don't have time for that, but enough to say that for me, just personally, when I first bumped into the idea of reincarnation when I was like 12 and 14 years old, it was like, but God is love. And I just couldn't imagine a God that would only give us like one shot at it.
Right.
And obviously, if you're brought up in a place where you're getting 3 square meals a day and you got a roof over your head, you're much less likely to rob or steal or cheat or hurt somebody. And it just seemed like an uneven playing field. Why would it seem like that? Kind of a, somebody that grows up in poverty and they only know drug use or theft from their family and their culture, well, of course they're going to do that, or it's very likely that they will do that. And so it seemed very unfair. And so the idea of a God that was loving enough that would give us an infinite number of chances and to keep coming back to try and get it right. I mean, there are plenty of mothers out there that have had errant sons and daughters that have given their children dozens and dozens of chances. And are you telling me that their love is bigger than God's? So I couldn't fathom that. So that's that would be my best argument there. Only from my perspective, everyone is entitled to believe what they believe.
Yeah, I just thought it would be fun to put that out there. In case people were worried about it or something,
Interestingly, in the regressions that I've done, the thousands of regressions I've done, no one has described, no one has encountered a hell in hypnotic regression. Not once. Nobody has said that. They've talked about how beautiful it is and when they go in between lifetimes and into the bardo, into what might be called heaven.
Oh well, in your soul's gift, none of the people in here had that experience either. So. Okay.
So this is likely that there's a lot of relief around that.
Okay. Now, how and why do people decide they want a past life regression?
Well, some people are very curious. Most of the people that come to me, it's not that they've got some overwhelming problem. But they're just curious. It's like, I wonder if I've lived before, and I wonder when I met my husband or when I met my wife, it just felt instant, like I knew I was going to marry this person. Or when I met my best friend Sadie, I'm making something up, we just met and it was like we were instantly friends, and where does that come from? Or even this, I met somebody and I instantly disliked them. I didn't know the first thing about them. And from the get-go, as we say in Texas, right away I knew I didn't like them. And so those are very often past life connections. I had a client come to me that had a phobia. She was really, really scared to go to the dentist. And she was, we worked to kind of just talk her through and said, did you have horrible experiences at the dentist when you were a kid? And no, she didn't. And but every time the dentist would lean over her wearing one of those white surgical masks when he would work in her mouth, it just terrified her. And we did a past life regression, and it turned out that she'd had a tribal incarnation with a witch doctor or a shaman who tried to heal her. And in doing so, he had this horrible mask that he wore that was supposed to scare the demons out of her. All within the thought system of the tribe, right?
Okay.
And he shook these rattles and he just sang these songs, and she didn't even recognize him as a human being. Remember, this very primitive way of thinking, in the same way that we see something on, CGI in a movie and it looks real to us. She didn't recognize that he was even wearing a mask. She just saw this horrible figure whose face was covered and chanting and making these noises over her when she was about 8 years old in a tribal incarnation, and then she died. And
she died after the experience
yes.
with
at about
with
8 years
shaman,
old. About 8 years old in that incarnation. So of course she was terrified of this person with a mask who claimed to be a healer. And so in the regression, I asked her to float up and see him in the afterlife, imagine him in the afterlife, and have him take off his mask. There was this very sweet old man behind it with tears running down his cheeks, saying, "I'm so sorry I failed you. I sang all the chants that I knew, and I did all the incarnations, and I rattled all the rattles, and none of them seemed to work, and I'm so sorry I failed you. I hope you can forgive me." And she was crying, and I was pretty touched myself, and they hugged each other. And guess what? When she came out of the regression, no longer scared to go to the dentist.
Wow. Well, I've heard of similar things. Like there was this one man that was being interviewed on television one time quite a few years ago. He had he developed as an adult this extreme fear of taking a bath. I mean, not only just not swimming, but or anything like that, to being in water. But he couldn't even sit in a bathtub full of water. He was developing these phobias. So he went to somebody who did a past life regression with him and found out that there was a man about a different name than his, of course, because you don't have the same name in every lifetime. But somehow they wound up finding out that in a past lifetime he had drowned in, he was in a submarine that something went wrong with it, and it was filling up with water, and he drowned. And so then he wound up finding out who this man, who he was in this previous incarnation.
Wow.
And there were family members. He wound up being able to find family members of the man who drowned in the submarine. And he actually went to meet these people that were, I don't know how many years had gone by or how long ago submarines were invented or anything, but he went and met the family members. I don't know, he was an adult when he was experiencing this phobia, so I'm assuming they either were very, very old when he met them, or they were maybe more descendants of the younger members of the family that had been born since, or something like that. I don't really remember all the details, but that's what he wound up finding out.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Dr. Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia is part of the faculty there, and for decades the University of Virginia has studied past life memories from children. So somebody 5 or 6 years old that can remember a lifetime in World War II or a lifetime in Hollywood, and they have documented these cases and they have done fact checks on them. And for example, there's a little boy that remembered being a Hollywood agent and being married 5 times and running with all these Hollywood stars in the 30s and everything, and they checked it out and they name checked him. And the guy that he said he was had been married 5 times and was a bit player in some Hollywood movies, but also a big-time Hollywood agent, and all of which could be verified. So increasingly there's evidence that this has some legitimacy.
Yeah, it's funny. Did you ever see the movie Kundun?
I did not.
It's about the guy who is the Dalai Lama. And when the Dalai Lama before him passed away, he was only a preschool age little boy. And these guys, these men were out searching for the person who was supposed to be the next Dalai Lama. And they showed up during a bad snowstorm at the home of this little boy and his parents and siblings. And the man who was searching for the next Dalai Lama was wearing these prayer beads that had belonged to the Dalai Lama who had just died, who had died. Well, I don't know, maybe he died before the little boy was born, I'm not sure, but the little boy said, "Those are mine." And he took them off the man and put them on himself. And after he played with them a little bit, his mother told him to give them back. Well, anyways, they left, when the storm let up, but then they came back later. And they wanted to take him to the temple. And they laid out a whole bunch of different objects, and they asked him to pick out the ones that were his in the past lifetime, as where he already was a Dalai Lama. And he was totally correct with all of them. And then there was this cabinet that he ran up to, the cabinet. He kept saying, "My teeth are in there. My teeth are in there." So somebody unlocked the cabinet and opened it up and took out the previous Dalai Lama's false teeth.
How about that?
You know, it was just amazing. He knew all of this stuff before, you know, so then they figured, oh, well, this is him. This is the one. And they literally paid his parents for him so that he could become the Dalai Lama. It was an incredible movie to watch. So, anyways, you know, just for anybody in the viewing audience who thinks they might want to, who never watched it, thinks they might want to, I would highly recommend it. It was just amazing. And he is, the Dalai Lama is such a pleasant person. He's just absolutely delightful. From what I've seen, you know, video of him and so forth. He's usually smiling, and there's this woman named Peace Pilgrim back during the 20th century. She used to walk all over the country all the time. It was something she was doing. She said that she wanted, she would never stop wandering until mankind learned the way of peace. But anyway, she had written a book about her experiences. And in this video that I watched about her and everything she did in her life, there's the Dalai Lama holding her book, you know, like recommending that people read it. So, anyway, it's just so fascinating. Now, how do you go about doing this for people? I mean, how is it done?
Well, it can be done individually, and that's sort of like the Lexus version, where I usually do a session, a 3-hour session, and that gives me time to get to know the client in their current incarnation, so I know who they are, and so they have a sense of who I am. I can answer all their questions about individual past life regression so that they feel safe with me. And that's really, really important. And then we'll have a good hour and a half to upwards to 2 hours actually in hypnosis, which allows us to build down very, very deeply into a very, very deep state. Many people say, I've had clients that have come to me and say, well, I can't be hypnotized. I don't even know why I'm here. I just did it on a lark. And then sure enough, they get hypnotized. If you feel safe with the person that you're working with, if you understand the process, it's very likely that you will go into hypnosis and that you will have at least some glimmers of past lives. They're not always in 3D IMAX surround sound, of course, like a movie, but they get impressions and information about who they were in another life. And then when they come back out of hypnosis, we always make sure and have some time scheduled to help them integrate it so it's really useful. So that it's not just like, oh, I was a pirate in my last life and I had this great parrot and a patch eye, you know, or an eye patch. Well, what does that mean? Why does that explain why you love the ocean? Does that have anything to do with why when you walk in you think you own the place and everything you can take anything you want, you know, which would be a pirate mentality. Like how does this impact you now?
Some people do that where they will walk into your house and just they see something they like, they'll just take it.
Makes you wonder who they were in their past lives. So, so we set aside time. It can also be done in a group. At Lilydale, I'm presenting several times this summer, and in 2 of them, I'll be doing a group past life regression. And this is where I'll take the entire audience into hypnosis. And of course, I have to tailor it for everybody there, so it's a little different than individual work. It's not quite as tailored for the individual. But I take the entire audience into hypnosis and help them to, first we go to a happy childhood experience, and then we go even further back to a past life, one that's very important and useful for them to know about. And even in a group setting, lots of people, I would say the majority of people have some past life memories. So we'll be doing that out at Lilydale. I'm doing 2 past life regressions.
Yeah.
And then I'm also doing one called Exploring Heaven that will take people directly into the bardo, or into what we would call heaven, the life between lives, where, like you were talking about Robert Schwartz, where they can explore why they chose the life that they're currently in. I know some people are watching, it's like, why did I choose my crazy ex-husband or my crazy ex-wife?
I know.
It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, when I was reading this book, it was like, why would they choose to be in this horrible relationship, or have all of these weird things happen? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and at a soul level, think about, very often from a reincarnation perspective, we think about Earth as being this school, okay? And so in Earth school, we can learn lots of lessons about taking care of ourselves, stepping back from people who are unkind or toxic. We don't have to hate them, but we can see that we don't deserve that. We can see ourselves as children of the divine or the universe, and I'm worthy, and I just don't have to have this husband or wife that constantly berates me or hits me or hurts me. That can be about forgiveness. I forgive them. I choose not to live with them, but I could forgive them. The law of karma would suggest that if we've been on one side of the coin, if you will, if we've been an abuser, then we will reincarnate and have the opportunity to be abused, so that we can learn from that. It's like, oh, I don't want to, now I know what it's like to experience the other side of this, and I don't want to do it again. And that doesn't mean that they're stuck with it, that they have to persevere with it. It means they can learn the lessons and transcend from that. And so for viewers that are watching, if you're wondering, my life's been really, really hard, what I would say is you have a very courageous soul.
Yeah, that's what he says in this book, that a lot of souls choose not to reincarnate because
Earth school's too tough.
Yeah, because it actually takes a lot of courage to decide to come back again.
It does, and also we incarnate with people both that we have a lot of lessons to learn from. Traditionally, when we think about soulmates, it's like, oh, we're holding hands with the person we love, yippity skippity, it's unicorns and rainbows. But soulmates are not only the people that we have close relationships with and have for many lifetimes, but also the ones that we have a lot to learn from. And so family members in particular, it's like, what is the deal with my family? I feel like I don't even belong with them, or, there's so much conflict there. And from a soul level, we might choose to come back to resolve those arguments, that bitterness, and forgive the person, which does not necessarily mean we become best friends with them, but that we see that they are wounded or hurt, and we can leave them be, and we can live our own lives. Or sometimes it can look like forgiveness and reconciliation as well. So we come back to learn. And so in our school, we're challenged by lots of lessons. But the cool thing is we also incarnate with people. There's viewers out there that have wonderful best friends, or wonderful partners maybe, or people that they work with that they love to be around. And these are people that we've loved and cared for and have been friends with in other lifetimes. And so they come back to the party with us. Isn't that nice?
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of phobias as a teenager and in my early 20s, and at the age of 20 to 25 decided that yoga, I had just recently found out about it, and it sounded like exactly what I needed. And at first I was doing things like yoga exercises out of just the instructions in books and things. And then finally, I think I might have been about 29 years old, I found out there was going to be an early November weekend workshop at the Chautauqua Institution at Bellinger Hall. And I told my husband, I really, really want to go to this, Well, as it turned out, the teachers, the yoga teachers, were actually devotees of this Swami Muktananda, who is gone now and has been for quite a few years, but we're devotees of his, and I remember they started teaching us these different chants, which are is the repetition of holy syllables. And as soon as we started doing that, it felt like I had come home for the first time in my life at the age of 29.
Yeah.
And, you know, there were times when in my own home as a kid, you know, I really didn't feel like I was at home. And I was on my way to this.
Well, and people always say things to me like, is past life regression the only way that I can remember past life memories?
Mm-hmm.
Some people have memories in dreams, but more often what happens is someone will say, I've always been drawn to Asian culture. Mm-hmm. Or I've always liked old cowboy westerns. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, these stories about tribal Africa. You know, I'm a white person from Georgia, and why am I interested in this? What in the world is going on here? Those areas that we're drawn to are very often places that we've been before in other lifetimes, potentially. It's funny, I read about the Holocaust in Germany, and of course I was interested in it and found it very fascinating and tragic. But I didn't really have any big emotional response to it. And then I was writing a paper on the Galveston flood of 1900. Huge, wiped out something like 17,000 people. And I actually held an original document, a letter written from someone in the flood to a family member, you know, that was potentially a farewell. He didn't know whether he was going to live through the flood, but he left this message behind. As it turns out, he did. But as I read the letter, I started shaking and weeping spontaneously. And then when I had a regression at one point later in my life, turns out I was a doctor, a medical doctor in the 1900s at the time of the Galveston flood.
Oh, gosh.
And so part of me really resonated with that era and that time. And every time I go to Galveston, it just feels kind of like coming home.
Yeah, yeah. Before we forget, I think I want to mention the dates that those are going to be.
Those workshops that we talked about at Lilydale?
There's going to be the one on July 13th. It's called The Quickening.
Yes, it's based on my book. We'll talk about all the different methods and techniques in it.
Okay. And then there was one coming up on August 16th, Exploring Heaven.
Yes, we'll actually go into the life between lives, where people have the potential to see why they chose their current incarnation, what karma they're trying to work out with given people, and what they hope to accomplish in this lifetime karmically.
And then on August 22nd, you're going to be doing a workshop on Edgar Cayce and reincarnation.
Yeah, we'll talk in a lot of detail about the concept of reincarnation. And of course, a lot of this information is based on the famous American psychic Edgar Cayce, who lived from the 1800s into about 1945, the best documented psychic of all time. So,
Right.
So we'll draw from his material, but we'll also do, as part of that, a group past life regression. So these are all opportunities for people to have a regression in a group setting and learn a lot about this procedure without the time and additional expense of doing it individually.
And then you are going to do several other workshops on slightly different topics.
Yeah, I'll be doing about I have 12 different appearances at Lilydale this summer, including some 2:30 services at the auditorium, where I'll be offering the what amounts to the sermon and the message, and then also some other workshops. And people will want to go to Lilydale Assembly, all one word, lilydaleassembly.org, to find out
when all of the rest of them are going to
yes,
be.
ma'am.
Okay.
And also, man, we got a really exciting program. this summer, Peter Cater, the double Grammy Award winner, is going to come out to
And-
see us. He's a new age and jazz artist. Will be there for a
New
concert.
Age and jazz
Uh-huh.
music.
Really nice
Okay,
stuff.
okay.
Yeah, and among many other famous wisdom teachers, if you will.
Yeah. This one woman that we got to be friends with last summer had just moved to Lilydale in June last year, and just before she came and did an episode of Fresh Perspectives for me, and she is an astrologer, and she also is a musician. So I don't know, maybe you've met her, but maybe you haven't. Colleen said that she hadn't.
I know of her, but I don't know her personally.
She's a really nice person. Now, every Monday morning, she texts me the Starcast of the week. Instead of a weather forecast, she texts me a Starcast for the week about all of these different things that are going to be going on with the planets and stars and things during the week. So
Nice.
we know which days of the week are good days to try to accomplish things, and the days that aren't really worth the effort and like that. So okay, so is the experience of the regression, what is it like for the people?
Most people love hypnotic regression
Do
because
they?
yeah, because when you're under, it's the 3 margarita effect. I mean, talk about chill. Your whole body, when you are deep in a trance state in hypnosis, your body just becomes like jello, and you're incredibly relaxed and incredibly peaceful. And then as we review, and the memories come from a past life, there can, just like if you were to hop into your current lifetime at different junctures, you would find that some of those junctures are very happy, some could be sad, some could be scary, but it's very much like watching a movie. This has already all happened to you, okay? And I often kid with my clients, I say, so you can look even at your death in another lifetime, and you're absolutely safe to do that. And I say, do you know how I know that? And they go, no. And I said, because you're here. Because the soul is eternal, okay? And even if our body dies and our corporal, the earth suit that we have, that we come into earth in, this, the meat suit, even if it dies, our souls are eternal and they return again. And so even if you see your death in another lifetime, it's not like you experience the horror of that. You float outside your body and you see that you live on. And that, even just that experience alone, for some people, it's like, wow, I've been through my death in another lifetime, so I know that I'm going to live on after this one. That doesn't mean we can't encounter some scary things. The very first regression that I did, I was training under Dr. Brian Weiss, and there was a small group of us, and as you might imagine, we would practice by, someone would play the client and someone would play the therapist. And I was working with this lovely German woman. I can't remember her name. I think I call her Inga in the book, The Quickening. The story's in the book. And Inga had flashes of floating outside of her body and seeing all these dead bodies, and she couldn't find hers.
Oh my
She
gosh.
was absolutely terrified at the moment, and she said, "Get me out of here." And so I hastily counted her up and out of hypnosis, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she goes, "No, it was just really scary. I never want to go back there ever again. I feel like I was hung, by the neck, and they stacked my body up, and that was so scary to see that." And I said, "We never have to go back there again if you don't want to." And then she woke up the next morning with a red rash around her neck.
All the way around?
You could see the braid in the imprint of the rope all the way around her neck. And she said, "I think we had better go back." We went back to that past life.
Did you say she was a German woman?
Yes.
Okay.
And I said, "Let's go back, but I'm going to direct you towards a time before your death." Okay? Because we don't exactly know when somebody's going to show up. Usually they show up, when they're 20s or 30s or something like that, and then we go from there. And so She remembered being 14 years old, 12 or 14 years old, a little German girl, and walking with her mother on a cold winter's day and seeing, this was probably the late 30s in Germany, and seeing these men in this gentleman in his Nazi uniform, and she felt sort of funny feelings that she hadn't felt before because he looked so handsome and dashing. And then he would look at her, and then she would turn away. She's just a kid, and she was kind of crushing on this German officer who looked, like really.
You said he was actually a Nazi?
Yeah, he was a Nazi officer. This is the late 1930s, so before the war broke out, or just as it was beginning, and she was a little Jewish girl.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was crushing on him, and then she saw him one day across the street, and he hit a woman, an older woman, and he hit an older woman and berated her while she was watching on this daily walk she would make to her mother to the bakery. And she was absolutely horrified. And then eventually we went to, and she said, "That was my late husband from my current lifetime, Klaus." And she said, "Oh my gosh, Klaus is a monster." Then she remembered being hung and leaving her body, and then she met Klaus in the afterlife, the man she was married to in her current incarnation who had recently passed.
Oh.
And she reunited with him, tears streaming down her face. She's so excited. And she said, "Oh, Klaus, he's not a murderer. That was last time. And he's a good man. And he came back to be a good man instead of a Nazi this time." And she explained to me after the regression how much guilt so many Germans carry about World War II and the Holocaust and the Nazis. And so he died in combat and then apparently incarnated again in their current life, and they married each other. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and so and that sexual attraction, that energy was there, and that's why they were drawn to each other. And so that has a very happy ending. And then she said she's so excited to see him on the other side, and connected with him and was crying. And she said, "Oh, but Klaus, now we have to say goodbye again." And he said something like, "No, you have to stay. You have to stay for Princess Diana and Heidi." And I had no idea what that meant. Turns out that was their dachshunds.
Oh.
And he said, "You have to stay, and your time will come where you'll leave too."
For a minute there, you had me wondering why she would have to stay back for Princess Diana.
Yeah, that was the name of their dogs. And she laughed, and that concluded the regression. But it was scary, but obviously it resolved itself, and they understood why they incarnated this time.
Mm-hmm. Now, that wasn't the story that I was supposed to remember.
Well, that's the scary one that you asked about. So.
Did you say that was your first?
That was my very first one. Talk about a trial by fire.
So this was somebody regressed you?
No, I regressed them and took them into that past life memory.
Okay. Okay, so that was going to be the next question. So, but it wasn't the one you just told.
Yeah, it actually was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking maybe that was, okay. Yeah, well, that's a really interesting story.
Yeah. So we often go back to learn things, and usually past life regressions will include, stuck points from other lives, and also it can include very happy memories. I've seen people that give birth in another lifetime and are so excited to have their baby, or they remember getting married in another life, and then when it's over they'll say, "How can I be so happy marrying somebody from another life when I don't even recognize them from my current lifetime?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "Because it was a magical memory and you're reliving it." Mm-hmm. And so we can relive successes and failures, and we can learn from all of those and integrate them. Mm-hmm. And it's possible that some physical illnesses or phobias can be cured by understanding their connection to another lifetime.
Okay, that's really interesting. Now, I got this question, I made up this question as a result of having read this book. Tell us how the spirit guides help us plan our next incarnation. there are spirit guides that help us with this.
When people are regressed, I'm going to draw upon the work of another theorist and the person who focused on developing life between life regressions. Okay, and his name is Dr. Michael Newton, and he's written a series of books. Destiny of Souls is one of them. Life between life regression, and he focuses on, again, he will take somebody into a past life, but he won't focus on the content of the past life. He'll focus on what happens to them in between lives.
Okay.
Okay. And obviously those are not all identical experiences, but thematically they're very similar in that very often it includes choosing of their current incarnation. So imagine Gregg's soul is floating in heaven somewhere, and I am choosing this incarnation, and you're going to be born to Bob and Betty Unterberger, and Betty's going to be interested in spirituality, and Bob is going to be a physicist, and you're going to learn both the intellectual rigor, but you're also going to learn about spirituality, Gregg. How about that? And I'm like, okay, bring it on. I'm ready to go. I'm coming into Bob and Betty. And Betty's on the planet going, I only have a quarter of an ovary left. I can't have any more children. And guess what? My soul is saying, I'm coming in anyway. Get out of my way.
Oh, did that really happen?
It really happened.
That
Okay.
your mother thought she couldn't have more children?
No way. The doctor said, you can't have another child.
And she had you. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So,
And according to what we see in thousands of these life between lives regressions, is that there are spirit guides, some of whom we've incarnated with before, some of probably angelic realm, people in the angelic realm who've never incarnated, who's to say?
because they're angels.
Because they're in effect angels, and they guide us and direct us and say, hey, what did you learn from your past life? And what do you want to learn in your current life? And we'll help you plan that. Depending on the regression, sometimes these spirit guides are very directive and tell us what we can and can't do. Other people report, you know what, I had free will, I could choose whatever I wanted, but they were going, don't do that, you bit off more than you could chew marrying that person. Or if you incarnate and become friends with this person, you're liable to get in a lot of trouble, you better be careful. Okay. And then they, and in fact, some people say, I made a mistake. I took on a lesson that was too hard by marrying this person or being born with this handicap or disability, if you will. So sometimes our souls bite off a little more than we can chew. The famous psychic Edgar Cayce was once asked, of what the soul plans for a given incarnation, about how much do they learn? And he said, roughly half.
Roughly half?
Yeah, so about half the lessons on average that a soul incarnates to take on, we learn.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, the last time I heard, if you got half wrong in an exam, you failed it.
I know.
But
like when we were kids going to school.
Yeah, but maybe half is good. Maybe we've taken on some tough lessons.
Yeah. It's funny, you always, speaking of passing or failing a test, you've always heard about the superstition about Friday the 13th being unlucky. Well, it seems like when I was a kid and going to school, it seems like every time I took a test on a Friday the 13th, I would get a 100 on it.
Wow.
So as a result of that, I actually have never since then really thought of Friday the 13th as being unlucky as a result of that. It's just sometimes you knew all the information and sometimes you didn't, and you're better at some subjects than others,
Well, and some of that may be, just think, if somebody's been an artist in a past life, they can be an artist in this life if they've been wildly creative. I mean, how do we account for somebody like Mozart that comes in and 6 or 8 years old is composing this amazing, beautiful music that's just absolutely beyond anything you've ever heard? Obviously, he, came in with that. And so one of the ways that we can wonder what and who we were in other lifetimes is to look at what our skill set is. What are we drawn to? What excites us? And there's probably a connection there.
Well, you know, I was talking with Colleen one time when she was here, not during the interview, but afterwards. I was telling her about something that I wanted to learn how to do, you know, that I was strongly drawn to when I was a little girl in elementary school, but wound up not having the chance to learn until I was 50.
Yep.
And, but anyway, what Colleen said to me was, if you were drawn to it at that young of an age, you were exposed to that particular thing in a past lifetime.
Yep.
So.
Yep. It's interesting, the famous psychic Edgar Cayce, in a prior lifetime, he had psychic abilities in that lifetime too, but he used them for ill. He was a riverboat gambler.
Oh my gosh.
And he would float out of his body and look at what it was in everybody else's hands and then come back and bet on it. I'm telling you, this is true story.
I don't remember that,
Yep.
but I read all of the books about him when I was young.
Right.
And I don't remember that, but probably because there were so many books about him.
Yep. So in prior incarnation, he didn't exactly use those skills and talents for good. But in his most recent incarnation as Edgar, of course, he devoted himself to giving readings, psychic readings, and diagnosing people with illness and bringing spiritual wisdom into the world. So I would say his karmic memory got well settled.
Yeah, there was something about, when I was reading about him, something about he had wanted to be a doctor. But, you know, his family didn't have much money or anything, you know, for him.
Well,
he
certainly aspired to be helpful to people.
Yeah.
More than anything else, he wanted to be helpful.
So the story goes, there was something about an angel that appeared to him one time when he was out in nature by himself and said they were going to help him.
Yeah, and they asked him, what do you want to do? And he said he wanted to help people, especially children. And in effect, it was something like the angel said, your wish will be granted, or your desire will be met.
So he did many readings, health readings for people, where somehow information would come to him from the universe or something about how to help this particular person.
He developed the ability to go into a trance, and he could medically diagnose someone that he'd never met. Someone would write him a letter and say, you know, my uncle is sick and he's going to be at this location at this time. Casey would go into a trance state and then could scan, apparently through the collective unconscious, or what might be called the Akashic Records or God's Book of Remembrance, infinite information. And he would tap into that person's body and could describe their symptoms and prescribe very often a cure, which when they followed what he said to do, would yield a healing. I mean, it's just truly amazing. I remember
that, and if they weren't getting better, he'd say they weren't following the directions.
Very typically.
Completely. I remember that. He had like a secretary who literally wrote down everything.
Yeah, he's the world's best documented psychic. A woman named Gladys Davis Turner was the stenographer.
Right.
And there are now 14,000 trance readings. Not all of those were documented by Gladys, but most of them. And they took down a record of every reading. And so, and those records are now available through the Association for Research and Enlightenment, which is devoted to the study of his work, both medically and spiritually. And in fact, I speak nationally for the ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment. And that's one of the things we're going to be doing an Edgar Cayce weekend at Lilydale.
Oh gosh, what was I going to say? Yeah, there was something about the things that he got the information for people to help them with their health readings, but they were natural alternative therapies.
Very often, not all. Yeah. Sometimes they were traditional remedies, but very often they were focused on diet, which was and behaviors like go walk every day or listen to music or, I'm not an expert in what's called the Casey remedies, but yeah, they were a variety of things that sounded very bizarre to traditional medicine, and yet when those were followed through, typically they led to a relief for that person or a cure.
Yeah. I mean, it was just amazing. I remember recommending the one book about him to somebody, a coworker of mine, once upon a time when I was working for the Resource Center. And I told her, I said, the name of the book that you want to read is, to learn about him, is Edgar Cayce, The Sleeping Prophet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know, I think she borrowed it from a library or something, because that's where I read, most of the ones I read about him, where I got them to read was by borrowing them from a library. And after she'd read the book, she came into work one day and just was kind of in a state of awe over what she had just read.
Mm-hmm.
That book that you told me to read, it was like, she was just in awe of that, of reading about him.
Well, and it's interesting, by way of talking about reincarnation, Edgar Cayce was a dyed-in-the-wool Christian, a very, very traditional Christian. He actually read the Bible once for every year of his life. And in about 1923, after he'd been giving readings for several years, there was a mention of reincarnation, of the particular symptom this person has is tied to a past life. And Cayce did not know how he felt about that, because this is the first he'd heard. He was thinking in terms of tradition, heaven and hell. But over time, through more readings, very often it would reference what had happened to them in other lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of the Cayce work that talks about reincarnation
Mm-hmm.
and karma. And Cayce found it in different instances in the Bible where it was mentioned even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they found out that a lot of things they'd been taught in church were not even true.
Well,
As
certainly
well
according
as
to what was the information that was coming through Edgar, yeah, some of it
Mm-hmm.
was at odds to traditional, and some of it was right in line, especially. There's no question that Edgar himself was a man of deep faith
Mm-hmm.
and deep commitment
Mm-hmm.
to Christianity, and in the same breath said that all religions, if they were studied faithfully, would lead to a connection to the divine or transcendence. I love it, sometimes Edgar could be very funny in trance. They said, which is the best religion? And he said, which one will you follow?
Yeah.
So, find one and put it to work, and you'll probably be a better human being. Don't sweat the details.
Yeah, just do whichever one you're drawn to.
Well, like the Dalai Lama said, kindness.
Kindness
is my religion. When did religion devolve into something about where we have to hate everybody and everything?
Yeah,
The exact antithesis of it.
Unfortunately, there are certain religions in the world that there are a lot of people who are doing terrible things because of their what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, this has been so much fun. You are such an interesting person to interview. But we've come to the end of another episode of Fresh Perspectives, and I want to thank you for appearing again today, and I hope you come on a whole bunch more times.
Oh, well, thank you for the kind welcome, and I hope to see some of your viewers out at Lilydale this summer.
Yeah, I hope they come over too. And I'll see those of you in the viewing audience when I do the next episode.